Everybody. We are actually live this week and alive. So last Tuesday evening, for those of you who are interested and don't know, I completed the video for John through Jewish Eyes, just so that we could start on this. Yeah, you okay? Okay. Yeah, sometimes it's good to communicate, Pam. It's good. So that we could start afresh. And I did start last week, but I gave kind of general, a general talk. And I will every once in a while interject some scripture, but this is mainly a historical look at the problem. What is the problem? The problem is that the Arabs have said. Now, by Arabs, you're going to find that the Arabs are gone. That we're really talking about Arab speakers. That the pure Arabs, that they're gone a long time ago. All right, but let's just call them the Arabs for now. The Arab position is that they've been there since time immemorial, right? And Joan Peters is the one who picked this up and did a lot of the legwork, and she wrote that book from time in memoriam. And some people love the book, some people hate the book. I have other sources as well, but the question is who was in the land, who was in the land for all these centuries. What has happened to the land? Has the land been developed? Was there ever an Arab culture? Was there an Arab a community? Was there a social structure that built up the land, that had borders, that had common features to it, and so forth? Or is that not the case? Or is it somewhere in between? And then we're going to trace that up to from the first century to the takeover, the Muslim Revolution, basically the Muslim takeover, conquest is what it's called, and then we're going to go from the Muslim conquest to the other eras, up to the Turkish era, the British era, and then on to what would be very important, the late 1800s, the early 1900s, onto the war of 1947 through 49, right? And then what happened, specifically what happened to the Palestinians? When did that term become popular? Was that always a term that Arab-speaking people took on? Were they always the Palestinians, or did that arise at a particular time in history? And you can just guess what my presentation is going to be. But then once we have the definition, then we backtrack and we ask the question, um, during the war for Israeli independence, I guess that's what I'm going to call it, the Arabs that were in the land, were they asked by their leaders to vacate their homes and properties in hopes of coming back soon, right, to a completely Arab speaking arena? Okay, oust the Jews. This becomes a Arab stronghold, or were they coerced by the Israelis and forcibly ejected? Hey, Mike, forcibly ejected. Or was there a little bit of both? Was there fear that because the Arabs had mistreated the Jews so badly, that now when the Jewish people took over, there would be retaliation? So we want to investigate some of that. And there are new documents that were released by the Israeli government that gives us some insight. It doesn't clear up the picture completely, but I think we're going to get a good insight as to what the Israeli position is. They were never there. The Arab position is we were always there. Israeli position, they didn't build anything, they didn't construct anything. There wasn't a people there. They ruined the land. The Arab position is no, we had villages, we had towns, we had structure, and so forth and so on. So those are the things, and it's not going to take as long as the book of John to, to convolute all of this. But there are some things that I think we should know, and that will help us, one, to think this through for ourselves, and second of all, and what I consider an important and meaningful dialogue, especially with Christians, to bring them into an understanding of the true history, because many Christians are bamboozled by this whole thing, and they've accepted a modern rhetoric, an anti-Israeli rhetoric, and it's a shame. It's scary, So part of our Messianic congregation, part of our goal is to try to be a bridge between the Jewish people and the church, and also to educate the church. And I hate to say, we have to educate the Jewish people as well. They get it wrong. They want to be so liberal, because we've been traditionally in this country a liberal folk, a democratic voters, so liberal that we've just lost sight of some common sense things. I mean, everybody knows, and I don't think I'm going to go into it, that Israel has come to the table time and time again, offering up the world, sometimes 95% of the land, just to have peace, and it was refused. So it's not even Arabs scratch their heads. Why didn't you? This was Yasser Arafat. Why didn't you accept 95% of the land? Because the idea is that the Arabs own the land, all the land. Okay, it doesn't leave room for a two-state solution, even though people talk about it. Okay, in many people's minds, it's just not a viable thing. It's the human thing. It's humanly possible in our imagination, but in practicality, as long as you have the Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and so forth and so on, it's just not a practical thing. So let's start with a couple of comments. I think I made them last week. Just a couple of things. 1919, there was an Arab covenant that arose from the Arab Congress in Jerusalem. And they said that the Arabs, now again, we're going to define that down the road, what we mean by Arabs today, okay? And it's not the same as Arabs of 2,000 years ago. It's just not the same. The Arabs in Judah, Palestine, were regarded neither as members of a pan-Arab nation, as a Muslim community, or in a tactical ploy as Southern Syrians. So this Arab covenant basically is saying what? They're nomads, not a settled people, not a definable people. Now, in the same year, the Syrian Congress had this view. They said they wanted to stress. They said these people are exclusively Syrian in identity, right? And that there should be no separation of the southern part of Syria, known as Palestine, from Syria. One group says they're not a people, right? Another group says, yeah, they're a people, they're ours. They're part of Syria. 1951, I'm skipping to show you the consistency. These are congresses that the Arabs concocted. One was the Arab Congress in Arab Congress. We started the Arab-Israeli conflict. Okay. Again? What's that? Yeah, I just gave the last. I'm sorry. I'll bring more next week. Okay. The handouts are, one, the outline of what we're going to be talking about, and second of all, a partial chronology for the land of Israel, 2,000-year chronology. So in the 50s, we have the Constitution of the Arab Ba'ath Party states the Arabs form one nation This nation has a natural right to live in a single state and to be free to direct its own identity, to gather all Arabs in a single independent Arab state. Okay? So Palestinians are viable. Arabs, as many as possible, should flood into this Arab state. No room for the Jews. It's an Arab state, right? And it should be united completely. 5 years later, Saudi Arabian the United Nation delegation, this is in 56, asserted that it is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing more than southern Syria.
So we're back.
Wow, man, I
You
know.
see the confusion. Okay, it's not like there's a solidarity of thought. By the way, all of these opinions were meaningless. It didn't spawn anything. It didn't do anything. It didn't create anything. The one identity idea it was never considered seriously until 1967. What happened in 1967?
The war.
Yeah.
The war. And Israel gained all this land. All of a sudden now, Israel has taken the Arab Palestine. Now everybody is consolidated. Yes, they are an indigenous people. They were always there, right? And you took their land away. You need to repatriate them. Okay, and some go even further. The original PLO charter, it said no Jews, basically. All right, so that means we've got to do some history detective work. Okay, the confusion is profound.
Quick question. In Genesis 15, I thought the land that belonged to Israel was from like the Nile to the Euphrates.
Yep.
Okay. Well, the Bible says it. So.
No, there's no question about it. Absolutely, no, there's no question about it.
They've never fully had that land, though.
Well, they kind of did. If you take a look at in the time, yeah, they kind of did.
Right, it was supposed to go from the Negev all the way to the Euphrates, and, like triangulate across.
But Solomon essentially had control of the entire land, whether it was called the land of Judah or the land of Ephraim or the land of the northern tribes. He had actual control over the entire Transjordan. So ostensibly they had it. There's no way they had enough people to control it. So he did it by trade agreements. He did it by marriage agreements and whatnot. But essentially, they did get it. Others will argue they're yet to get it. Okay, I'm open to that. Yes, the Bible's very clear. There's no question about it.
It's hard to explain to an Arab person.
Yeah.
Well, usually you don't argue from anybody born in the land. Okay, I found this out from the 60s. I was arguing my head off. I knew Israel was going to win this war. I didn't know how. And my friends thought I was crazy, and a bunch of us in the Messianic congregation were pushing this. Israel is going to come out of this a winner, and they did. But and we argued over it. But the people in the land, I never found any success. Whether it's an Arab trying to convince an Israeli-born Jewish person or an Arab born into the land. So, but my concern is not them. I don't think we're going to convince them. My concern is the Jewish community having a good understanding of what reality is. Okay, because many of them don't believe the Bible. Okay, and many Orthodox, you're going to be surprised. Many Orthodox on the ultra Orthodox side, especially, believe that Israel should give the land back.
Oh, wow.
That it was started by Zionists, which were gangsters, and they were anti-God and anti-Torah, and they think if you give the land back, there'll be no war. Well, that's true. The Arabs will do what they did before; they'll fight amongst themselves. Okay, so the Jewish community needs education, and the Christian community needs education, so that they stop believing these ridiculous non-historical statements. Okay, so, and the main statement we're going to be looking at is, and listen, let me tell you, Israel's history has not been totally clean in this whole thing either. We have to look at that in a serious way. It's not like good Jews, bad Arabs. All right, but from a reasonable standpoint, Israel, by and large, has accommodated all the UN resolutions. Okay, they stood by it, and they've given good faith, and they've been at the table over and over and over and over trying to get a resolve. Okay, so I think that it's good to start at the beginning when Israel had rule, and you know that before the 7th century CE, 1220 or thereabouts, we had a nation form, a theocratic nation, with a king and a government and boundaries and structure and an army and a language and a religion and so forth and so on that could be and was well defined. Okay. You can argue before that it was clans settling areas. Reuben could be defined, Gad could be defined, Benjamin could be defined, so forth and so on. But they weren't super united except in time of war.
But the Bible defined all those segmented tribal lands.
Yes, it did. Okay. But when we come to a unified structure, we look at the time of King David.
Yeah.
Okay. We look at the time of Solomon. And you can see no one would argue that no, that didn't exist. Unless you think like the old way, critical scholars, well, David really wasn't a big fat king. He was just a warlord. And most of that has been dispelled. But, people still believe that stuff.
I mean,
So
the fantasy book that we're carrying around here.
So 12. All right. So that means this is almost 2,000 years before the Arab conquest, right? So, Israel clearly was there in great numbers. I don't think anybody doubts that at all. Israel consistently, the Jewish people were persistent in their presence in the land. It was a high honor to do what? To make a pilgrimage from without the land to Jerusalem, the capital, had a well-defined capital, right? So Jerusalem was the center of Jewish life for the whole world, not just for Israel proper, but the whole world looked to Jerusalem. In fact, you remember Solomon's prayer: God, when the people are in foreign countries, if they pray towards Jerusalem, would you answer their prayers? And he said he would. Okay. So Jerusalem has always been and still is next year in Jerusalem, every Passover, right? So it's our culture, our religion, our anticipation is steeped, whether you're secular or religious, in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. We've seen this pretty much. Many of the Jews in the diaspora, like I say, went to Jerusalem for a pilgrimage for the three holidays, for Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot, among other times. So we have the Roman conquest, right? The Roman conquest, the Jewish people were considered troublemakers, turbulent. They didn't veer from their traditions, and it was a constant battle for the Romans to keep order. Hadrian in 40 CE, made people pay the Jews tax in Rome. That didn't go over big with people. Even Christians were made to pay the Jews tax because they were linked with the Jewish Messiah. And they didn't like that either, but they were stuck with it. He was determined to convert everybody to the Roman way. And
What year is this?
40. Hadrian's about 40. So what happens is there is this terrible civil war within Israel among the religious parties, and it weakens Israel tremendously. And the Romans win that particular war, and Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed, and Bar Kokhba was the leader at that time. It's an interesting thing. Bar Kokhba, son of the star, was a name given to him by the famous Rabbi Akiva. And so what was his name before? Bar Koziba, son of a liar.
Wow.
So he brilliantly changed it It's the son of the star from Numbers 24. A star shall arise out of Judah.
Oh,
But anyway, they were defeated. Not Bar Kokhba. I'm sorry, that's later. 70 CE. Jerusalem was defeated. The Israeli war effort was weakened, and the Romans killed 580,000 people. It was a lot of people. Yeah. However, many lived. In 132, 135, that's Bar Kokhba, and they revolted again, and again, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people were slain at this time.
Didn't Akiva say he was the Messiah?
Yes,
Yeah.
he did. He proclaimed him the Messiah. He was a general. They coined. They made coins with Bar Kokhba's name and figure on it. Yeah.
Why do the traditional Jews, some of them seem to really think Rabbi Akiva was so wonderful? That's idolatry. Saying Bar Kokhba was a Messiah.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
I've heard them
Look,
talk about
the early centuries revered their rabbis. What can I tell you? And especially when Jerusalem fell, these were the leaders of the people. They revered them. Look, what happens? This is just a sidebar because we always seem to get on them. What happens when you're in Babylon?
No, what in the world, y'all? My computer's gone.
She's not
kaboom.
saying that to me. Okay. She's saying that to her computer. I just want to be clear.
It
Okay.
just started playing Misha Guess.
Well, Misha Guess is a good.
You hit the
I
wrong
didn't-
button?
I didn't touch it.
Okay. Or
Sorry.
Kokhba upset you.
Oh yeah, 'cause I
Okay.
didn't like that.
So
idol.
what we have in Babylon, you don't have a temple. So what do you do? So you start thinking about what is around us that we can adapt, blend in, but remain separate. And the Zoroasters had a religion that was basically without sacrifices. So Zoroasters had what do they do? Well, they have a good word, a good thought, and a good deed. So the Jews figured, okay, our priests aren't functioning. We're going to turn to the Torah, and we're going to make the study of Torah the greatest thing in the world. People can listen to the Torah. They can memorize the Torah. We're going to lift the Torah up because it's the Word of God, and we're going to say also a good word, right? That is a good prayer, a good deed, right? It's tzedakah, and I forgot what the other one was, but it was akin to the three
Repent.
things. No, it wasn't repentance.
Oh, what was it?
Good thought,
Oh,
good word,
thought.
good deed.
Oh, good
The rabbis
thought.
had parallels to all these things.
Yeah,
So
what I was
that's
saying,
where the
parallel.
evil inclination, good inclination came into being as a theology. You have a good inclination, you have the evil inclination, but the evil inclination is subdued until your hormones cook in.
Where did
Kick
they
in.
all go? I know 600 when you have the rise of Islam, but I'm just surprised that it came in and took, basically wiped out the entire religion. There's very few Zoroastrianists left.
Well, as many ancient religions, the moon god is not popular anymore and things like that. They morph. The larger unit takes over. Islam takes over, and it took it 200 years to. Most of those followers of Muhammad, we're going to find out, were pagans, and they remained pagans, many of them, for 200 years. So there was a different motivation for them outside of religion, and I'll get to that. But the larger group, Christianity dominated, and so all these little groups, bye bye, and the Celts have always been looked at as strange, even the Christian Celts, because they kept a lot of their thoughts, from the Celtic tradition. I'll Christianize them all, but they're kind of looked at like this because they're not part of the greater thing. So it's not that difficult. The
They were
larger group.
grafted in.
Yeah, the larger group always defines. So we've got this guy Lucius Cassius Dio. This guy is a Roman historian, a senator, He published 80 volumes of history, and he says this in his History of Rome. In the first century, there were no fewer than 1 million Jews in Egypt, in a total of 8 million inhabitants. That's 1 in 8. Okay, that's almost 10%. Well, more than 10%. Of these, 200,000 lived in Alexandria, whose total population was 500,000. Can you imagine the proportions there, right? So others, Adolf Harnack, he's 1851 to 1930, Lutheran theologian, prominent church historian, writes from his research that there were 1 million Jews in Syria at the time of Nero, and 700,000 Jewish people in Judea. This is 60 CE, just before the 70 war. Okay, and he allows for another 1.5 million in other places around Israel. So it's a very large population, right? So we estimate then in the first century 4.2 million Jews in the world, which is pretty extensive, right?
Mm.
Now, Hadrian changes the name of Jerusalem to a Roman name, right? And Anatolia Capitolina, the capital of Anatolia, which is basically, Mesopotamia, the Roman Empire, that type of thing. And he built a temple to Jupiter, and you know the story. And he wanted the name Judea because Judea is modeled after Jew. Okay, that's where that comes from. Judah, Jew, one who is from Judah. And so basically, there were many centers. They established tremendous culture in the early centuries, cultures in Yavna, Usha, Shepharim, Sepphoris, Bet Sha'arim. These were all academies of learning, all centers with significant. Safad was another one, Hebron, all huge learning centers. And out of those learning centers and the commerce of the first through the fifth century, culminating in 212, we get the Mishnah, a code of Jewish law, and then in 412 we get what's called the Jerusalem Talmud, the commentary on the Mishnah. In Babylon, it was later, right? But what I'm saying is there was a very vibrant and active community before the Arab conquest in the land of Israel. Okay, and the Romans really did not define Palestine. Palestine was given by Rome, right, as a what? As an allusion to Philistia, the land of the Philistines, land of the uncircumcised, right?
Mhm.
So it was a slam, but it didn't stop. It didn't stop the commerce, trade, learning, exchange of ideas. Gamaliel is said, that was Paul's teacher. He was said to have 500 students studying Hebrew and 500 studying Greek. Now, what it means, the numbers are immaterial. What it means is he took as much effort to educate and connect with the people inside Judea as he did with the Gentiles in the outside world. And he was a great statesman. And he was able to converse with people of other cultures. That's the teacher of Paul. Okay? So Paul's right in line with his character disposition.
Centers of learning located? Were they just within Israel, or
No, Babylon had more. There were more in Babylon. Babylon was much larger. Jewish. Oh yeah, yeah, huge, huge centers. Babylon had more Jews actually than Israel. But I'm just saying that the Jewish community was so vibrant. Listen, in the first century, Jacob Yoch, who was a professor in Toronto, Canada, for many years, a Messianic scholar, a Jewish believer, well known, and he estimated that in the first century, 100,000 Jewish people came to faith.
Wow.
So I want you to keep this in perspective. Of the Sadducees, there were 5,000 card carriers. Of the Essenes, there were 10,000, and
Wow.
of the Pharisees, there were 5,000. So to have 100,000 Jewish believers,
Hmm.
you know, it argues not only for the success of the movement, but it argues for a rich and lively debate religiously that kept these believers within the structure of the nation.
Wow.
Even though they were under Roman rule, they managed to keep this culture going. Despite the 70 CE war and the Bar Kokhba revolution in 132 to 135, they kept this thing going. It's an amazing story, really, right? So basically, we see that the Jewish people were very um, aggressive. What happens when the Bar Kokhba revolution hits? Jews in large numbers move to the Arabian Peninsula, right? And what do they do there? They prosper. They build up the land. They produce cities. They produce farming, which the Arabs hated. They didn't like farming. They thought it beneath them. It was odious to them. It's the Jews that built up the farming industry, the agriculture industry, the city commerces and trade and so forth and so on. And what also did they do? They converted a lot of these Arab nomads to Judaism. As a matter of fact, the kings of Yemen were Jewish for 500 years. They were, yeah, they were very, very, very successful as missionaries, right? Not only here, but later in the Black Sea, the Khazars, I don't know if you know any history there, the Khazars in the 12th century they were convinced by debate. Yehuda Halevi, it's the second Yehuda Halevi, had a big, the Khazari, it's a whole book on the debate for Judaism, and he convinced all the Khazars. They all converted to Judaism. So they were very successful there as well. Of course, that's later in history, but I'm saying that in the early centuries, Jewish people were strong effectors of culture and created new cultures for the nomadic people. The chief, let's see, everybody knows the city of Medina, right?
Yeah.
It's the second most holy city in Islam. Guess who settled it first?
The Jews.
The
Oh,
Jews.
wow.
The Jews settled Medina and made it prosper. As a matter of fact, it was one of the poorest cities in all of Arabia, and the Jewish people came there and made it prosper. And what do you think that did? It attracted Arabs from other lands to come,
Wow.
right? So Medina really didn't have a stable form of government as the other cities in the Arabian Peninsula. It was the Arabs then were really Arabs. These were the Bedouins. You know, they roamed the land. They didn't govern the land. What am I trying to say? They ruled. Okay. Anybody that wanted to do things, build a well, whatever it was, had to have their permission, right?
Wow.
Because they had armies. Okay, they had warriors, a lot of them.
But they didn't have a government.
And they didn't have a centralized government. Nowhere, no centralized government, nothing to make everybody click in the
So it's all
right way.
warlords.
What's that?
So it's all like feudal warlords.
Feudal warlords that generally feuded amongst themselves. Okay, back and forth, back and forth. All right. So Medina is there. The town, it was torn up by feuds, in poverty, as I said, and rival tribes. Jewish people were there. The tribes still attacked Medina, but the Jewish people, in league with some of the local Arabs, were able to fend them off and continue to work there. Now, ultimately, under the Muslim conquest, Medina was conquered and the Jews went this way. Okay. But up to that time, it was a thriving city, thriving with Jewish people. In the last half of the 5th century, many Persian Jews fled from persecution to Arabia, and which increased the Jewish population there. Around the 6th century, Christian writers talk about the continuing importance of the Jewish community that remained in the Holy Land. Okay, they would come and they would find significant amounts in the hundreds of thousands. I'm talking about this is the 5th century, the 400s. Like I said, they had seminaries, they had cities, they had culture, they had public forum, they had religious, as long as you believed in the one true God, any Judaism practically could survive, right? So when obviously when Muhammad came along, that changed everything. But up until that time, there was a very, very strong Jewish presence. If you were a Jew from Crete and you found yourself being persecuted, that's where you'd go, Arabia, right? Not Israel, but Arabia. That was the land of promise for everybody. So the Jewish community was building up in Arabia, while the Jewish community still remained strong up until for 7 centuries, until Islam conquered them. So one of the tribes that was significant and claimed pure Arab blood was the Quraysh tribe, and that happens to be the tribe that Muhammad was from. Okay, so that is a significant tribe. Whoever's significant in the tribe is going to be a significant person. Okay, so what happens is Muhammad comes into the scene. The Jews refuse to recognize him as the prophet. In fact, they ridicule him. When he comes in finally in power, you know what happens to them. They're killed. They're exiled. They're tortured. So that was the end of that. All right.
Didn't
So-
you, the Jewish person, to write down the words of the Quran?
Jews and Christians wrote the whole thing.
But not of their own volition.
I'd say I'd rather help out than die. Maybe that would,
Yeah.
But it was Jews and Christians that helped him write the whole thing. I mean, so Christianity is Judaism, it's a little paganism. Put it all together, right? It's an interesting document. So the Arabian Peninsula was filled with Jewish peoples and Arabs who were basically these nomadic tribes, and that we can understand. So what happens is now we come to the Arab conquest, and at the beginning of the Arab conquest is the invasion of Medina, and Caliph Omar was ruling. He receives the report from his general that the Arabian invaders had conquered Alexandria. Now, I told you it was 200,000 out of 500,000, right? So look at what they confiscated. This is in Alexandria. It was just one city. Okay. So you can imagine that this is going to be multiplied throughout Arabia and throughout the Holy Land, throughout what's then known as Palestine. Okay. So this is what they did. His general said, this is all written down. I mean, it's part of written history. I have captured a city from the description of which I shall refrain. Suffice it to say that I have therein seized 4,000 villas with 4,000 baths, 4,000 poll tax paying Jews, and 400 pieces of entertainment for the royalty. So basically, they come in and they take everything away and they oust the Jews. That's the time where we lost our land. Okay, we at that time, not under the Romans, but under the Islamic conquest, we lost. We were a militarily defeated people, and we lost the land.
What is
Basically,
a piece of entertainment?
Yeah, that's what I was.
Instruments, women, anything that you can imagine for pleasure, makeup,
Mm.
glass, finery, linens, anything to make your life enjoyable. Vessels of all kinds, gold, silver, jewels. That's the way. That's the way the English translates
Wow.
the Latin. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So shortly after the Arab conquest, the Jews assert their goals because they, along with Christians, were considered the Dima, and Dima means protection, and so it's the protection really from them gaining equal status, right, with the Arabs. The Quran would say two religions cannot live in the same land. Later, when it was impossible to eradicate every Jew and Christian, it was reinterpreted to mean two religions can't remain in the same land equally. Okay, but originally it didn't mean that at all. It meant that only Islam can remain. So the Dima were considered really the infidels, and there were lots of restrictions and humilities. You couldn't walk on the same side of the street as a Muslim. You couldn't a lot of things. Which I don't need to go into because that's not really our point. Look how badly they were treated. Okay, our point is that up to that time, the Arabian Peninsula was filled with Jews. The land of Israel was filled with Jews. Right, Alexandria and those very important cities all over Egypt were filled with Jews. Now those in Egypt, the Jewish communities persisted. Many of them were able to adapt. Let's put it this way. Although under this title, Dema, the infidel, Christians were also in that category, by the way. So in the centuries between the Roman domination and the Jewish state, right, the Jewish population remained there, but basically they were reduced to peasantry. Okay, if they stayed, nobody was rich anymore. Lands were confiscated, property was confiscated, money was confiscated. They were relegated to a simple, very simple peasantry life. It doesn't mean they stayed there, okay, as we'll see. Josephus records that the Jewish population was between 5 and 7 million people before the destruction of Jerusalem. After 70 CE, the War of 70 CE, the people still numbered, according to Josephus, 3 million. Despite the deportations, despite the number I told you, 600,000 Jews in that war were killed, right? 3 million Jews in the land is a lot of Jews. Okay, so they are still there. Since the fall, this is the British Royal Commission in 1937. They have the commission on Palestine. They have the commission on Syria. They have the commission on Egypt. They have all these commissions. That's how that works, right? Very, very bureaucratic way about them. British Royal Commission, 1937. Always since the fall of the Jewish state, some Jews have been living in Palestine. Fresh immigrants arrived from time to time and settled mainly in Galilee. That's in the north, in numerous villages spreading to Lebanon and in towns of Safad and Tiberias. So, according to the reports, at various times in history, the Jewish populations managed to remain persecuted, but they remained. They existed. Safad never lost its Jewish population. It's been there. It's been Jewish ever since. Okay, and if you go to Safad, you know why? It's this little hubble in the mountains. It's hard to get to, and who wants it? But they had a very strong community there. If you go to Safad these days, it looks like you're in the Middle Ages. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The housing looks like the Middle Ages. The garbage of the Middle Ages. Just an amazing. Streets are like this narrow. It's an amazing town, really amazing. But one of the holy cities.
How do you spell it?
In English, it's Safad or Safed. In Hebrew, it's S apostrophe F-A-D, Tzfat. Okay. All right. As I said, Christian rule in the 5th century under Constantine, this was called Byzantium. The Byzantine rule lasted quite a while. And the Jewish population is diminished because civil and political rights and religious rights diminished. So the Arabs reconquered Israel, and the Byzantines were out and the Arabs were in 634 to 637. This guy, Hogarth, David Hogarth, you might come across him in the writings. In 1877, he was considered one of the greatest authorities on Arabian history at the time. And he saw not only the increase of Arab rule, but he saw the decline of the Arab rule as well. They only ruled for about 22 years. Okay, and then we're going to talk about how that happened. Shortly before the 8th century, a caliph ascended to this tribe of Muhammad, and he had been born of a slave mother. His two successors, the last of the dynasty, were sons of a son of a slave woman, and the reigning family could no longer boast pure Arab blood. This was symptomatic of loosening moral standards, of intermarriage, of conversions. What's being said is the Arab rule in the 8th century, that there were no more Arabs. Okay? By the 8th century, they had so diminished their bloodline. There may have been a few here or there, but fundamentally, they were gone. They were gone by famine. They were gone by intermarriage. You catch what I'm saying? Right? So to speak of Arabs after this is not to speak of Arabs after the 8th century. You can't speak of the Arabs anymore. So what does the name Arab mean? I'll talk about it in just a little bit. Yeah. What does it mean? It means Arab speaking. Okay? Surely doesn't mean Arab. It doesn't mean anybody that could ever say, I conquered that land, I stayed on that land, we've always been there. It just didn't happen that way. And eventually they were conquered by other people. Okay? So, yeah. All right. So, yeah. Question? We good? Yeah, Mike.
Maybe unrelated, but are the current day Palestinians Edomites the descendants of Esau? No.
Gone. They're not descendants of Esau. They're not descendants of Ishmael. They're not descendants of the Arabs. They-
Obadiah talks about descendants of Edom or Esau being their land being dispossessed.
Keep this in mind.
Just trying to relate it to
If I
Obadiah.
speak of let's say Egypt, Egypt's a bad number, right? Because they kept us in captivity. When I'm speaking of a latter kingdom, the Bible may call that Egypt, even though it's not Egypt. It might be Persia.
She has a
Okay.
opinion, I guess.
Or if let's like for example, in the first centuries in rabbinic literature, Rome was called Edom.
Oh,
Well, Rome, it wasn't Edom, but it's called by these names. So you got to be a little careful. Latter kingdoms are called by bad names.
We're
The enemies of
Babylon.
Israel. Huh?
We're Babylon.
We're Babylon.
yeah.
Okay. We're not Babylon, but we're called Babylon. All right. So that's the way that goes. The Arabs never created their own Palestine. They never did. Right. There was never an independent country of Palestine, nor a Palestinian rule. And the word Palestine was given by the Romans. And the brevity of the Arab Empire was determined less by the force of non-Arab elements than by the inability of the Arabs to produce it. They could not produce a lasting government that governed everybody. They could not produce an economy that kept people working and together. They could not produce a trade system that would expand their growth and do good for their education, for their, medicine, for art, for all these things. All this great, we're going to find later on, all the great artwork and astronomy and medicine and whatnot that comes out of the Middle Ages has nothing to do with the Arabs. Okay, so we're gonna see where that came from. Okay, so clearly now whatever happened later, we'll have to deal with that. Okay, who was there in the 1800s and in the 1900s and in the 20th century? We'll deal with that. But right now, you know that Arabs were not there from time immemorial. Okay, the people who claim to have been there from time immemorial simply were not. Okay, they're just not there. As a matter of fact, yeah.
Given this, then, is before we
Yep.
move forward. So, who really are the Arabs even then? Because if they were more nomadic, and is that true? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
So if they were more nomadic without, and they were around like the Arabian peninsulas and just traveling here and there.
They mainly become the Turks. The Turks take over and infiltrate that area big time. There were Persians, there were Greeks, there were, I'll mention all the countries, okay? But the great influx into the Arabian Peninsula and in Israel caused the Arabians essentially to disappear. And now you have different groups that have been overtaken by the Muslim conquest by, let's say, if it's by the 9th century, the world in that area is speaking Arabic. So Arabs are no longer the Arabs that we talked about. They are Arab speakers with different values and different goals in mind. And only the heavy hand could bring unity to an area. Like the Turks brought some unity, then it got busted up. And the Christians came in. Then they were conquered back and forth, conquering back until the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was a heavy hand until what? Until 1917, end of World War I, where it was divided up. And where it was divided up, you have different. We're going to get to it. The North Arabian Arab speakers hated the Southern. They were racist.
Oh, wow.
I'm not kidding. They hated the Southern Arabia, the different cultures, different values, and the Southerners hated the Northerners. It was like this horrible racism going on between them. Just really kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. So there was no unified Arabian Peninsula. We can't point to it.
I mean, even dating back to Abraham, you had the Hittite kingdom, like the Turkish area, the empire. But it was always kind of a mixed people all the way through there.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Even Abraham and his father and their family, came up north into that area around the Hittite area before he went into Canaan. Before Abraham went into Canaan. So I would argue that when you look at some of the ancient peoples and where they were, there wasn't. I mean, there was just a mixture of kingdoms.
Sure. That's why I go back to 1220 instead of Abraham's time. In other words, if I go back to 1220, I can identify a unified people group, a unified government, a unified economy, a unified army, unified language. See, I chose clearly not to go back before that because of exactly what you're saying. It wouldn't be valid. Because you'd have groups of people, different clan, who's really in charge? Well, no one, okay? But that's what we have here in the Arab-speaking world. We have that same scenario with no central force building up anything, okay? In fact, the word Arab means Bedouin and more often meant raider. That's how they made their living. I know today we have the nice sheep, we have the nice herds, camels, and so forth and so on. But really, these guys kept themselves going by robbing.
Yeah.
like coming in and raiding villages or raiding
Wow.
a caravan, or you know.
They were just like tribal cultures.
Just like the plains, our plains
Yeah.
Indians, which is
Yeah, they were not. There was not a single government for all of the
Yeah.
American,
Like Mongolians.
like Mongolians within China. All right. So largely, we don't speak about after that. We don't speak about the Arabs. We speak about Arab speakers, which in modern days essentially were the Arabs. Okay, we talk about the Arabs. What has come to be, but Egyptian Arabs are quite different than Lebanese Arabs, are quite different than Jordanian Arabs, are quite different than Saudi Arabian Arabs. Okay, and even Jews. There are Arabic Jews. They have a whole history. You know, it's funny when people ask, "Have you ever considered speaking, teaching a course on Judaism?" I said, "Which one?"
Yeah, well,
It's impossible. It's Judaisms. It's not Judaism. I mean, the African Jews are a whole different world than Persian Jews, than Arabic Jews, and than Eastern Jews, Eastern European, so forth and so on. So you have that type of thing. The Meccan period of the Arabs was not a governmental era. They were unable, for many reasons, to develop into what they needed to develop in order to perpetuate structure. Okay, for the reasons that I had mentioned earlier. Basically, it was conquest and raiding, and territories were overrun more than conquering to stay. That you'd come into a place, you'd conquer, you take all the goodies away, you wouldn't stay there. Okay, you'd go back to your wherever you were staying. So this particular, let's see, yeah, okay. So throughout the whole period after the Arab conquest, really has more to do with Christians and Jews, and being at the forefront of all the enlightenment, all the science, all the right. We get this idea that the Arabs were the ones that, right? It wasn't true. It was the Jews who had the knowledge, Christians who had the knowledge of medicine, of science, of they affected Arab areas and came up with most of this beautiful stuff. I'm not saying there weren't Arab thinkers and artisans and whatnot, but it was all initiated really by Christians and Jews who were the enlightened people. Okay, that's the only way I can say it. I'm not saying better than. I'm just saying their culture was far ahead of a conquering group of marauders. Okay, and in fact, the followers of Muhammad were basically most of them pagans until 200 years. It took them 200 years to get everybody to speak Arabic and to come under the Quran. That's a long time, right? So what attracted them? The money, the wealth, the goods that they conquered, all the goodies that they, whatever cattle and sheep and whatnot that they could take away. Being on the winner's side is good. Like the guy said, it's good to be king, right? So it's a sad commentary, but this is not the only place it's happened. Okay, during the times of the barbarians and their fight against Rome, and even before that, it was the same kind of thing. There was no unified anything, right? They came in, they conquered, they didn't stay, they came back. That's only later that people begin to think, well, we can stay here and we can build here. And somebody gets a bright idea. Oh, wait a minute, we can connect these different villages, and build them into cities. Now we have a structure. Okay, that's fairly late in history, right? So by the way, the Arabic civilization, when you look at historians, the way they view them, the Arabic commodity was at the lowest level of culture, right? The lowest level of enlightenment. Okay, it's not to put them down. That's just where they were. But we get the idea they were at the highest level, and everybody got along real well. You know, it just wasn't the case, right?
So when we hear that all the science and astronomy that all came out of Alexandria, for example,
Yeah.
it wasn't the Arab people that did it. It was the Jews.
The Jews and
Once
the
again.
Christians, really. Yeah.
Didn't the Arabs destroy that library? At
They
Alexandria?
destroyed it completely.
All that knowledge that was lost, they destroyed it.
Done. They didn't want any of that. So how could they develop anything?
Well, they're good at, I think, explosives.
I'm saying no. I'm saying
That
they.
was the Chinese.
All right. So I want to. I want to talk. I want to talk a little bit more about the difference between being Islamic and being Arab, because we're going to talk about in that chronology. If you take a look at it, there's groups of people, and I'm going to try to explain who they are. But what you have is these groups of people coming in, and you think that they're just more Arabs coming in, but they're not. They're Islamic, but not Arab. They're Arab speakers, but not Arab. As I said, the Arabs, within 200 years, they're bye-bye. There's no more pure Arabs. So now then, what can we say about the Arab speakers? Do the Arab speakers have a right to the land? And are the people that we see today connected to them strongly enough to have any rights to the land? Okay. That's the next step. Clearly, they are not connected in any way to the first 6 centuries. Okay, nothing. Even the first, let's say, 9 centuries. They're not connected. Up till the 9th century, we have no connection between what we call the Palestinians today, or even the whole Arab-speaking world. No connection, except for maybe a few here and there that say they can trace their lineage back. Good luck, no connection. Now, is there a connection starting, right, that we can connect to the modern day Arab speakers, specifically in the land of Israel? All right. So that'll be our next topic next week. Final comments or question?
No, I had a conversation with somebody a while ago, and it was similar to the Jacob and Esau being the wild and handsome man, and that's all the Muslims today. And I said, well, no, Islam is an ideology; it's not a race of people.
Correct.
And there'd be a lot of, if it was the precursor to Arabs, I think you'd have a lot of Arab Christians and Arab Jews that found that kind of offensive.
Well, they do.
Yeah.
And if you call somebody from Iran an Arab, you just wait for the conversation. Okay, it's going to be aggressive. Okay. Now, honestly, this is from the history. I mean, I'm personally satisfied with it, but because I'm Jewish, I have a feeling for the land of Israel. There is some bias in me. There's no question. I'm not completely objective. But when I read this stuff, I see the actual history. It's kind of like, where is the connection? Where does the connection start with the modern day people who claim a right to the land?
There has to be at least one scholarly counter argument on the Arab side.
Absolutely. And they mainly come from what's called the new historians. The new historians.
Like revisionists?
No, they're not. They don't call themselves revisionists. Israel.
Would we consider them revisionists?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they say their material is based on newly attained documents
Oh, boy.
regarding the War of Independence. So, but we're gonna examine that. I have those documents, so we can look at that. But I don't want to go past that to all of
Did the
the.
ink dry on them yet?
Alex Jones has the same documents, I think,
Yeah.
but many of them are redacted.
All I can say is It is a fascinating study. Is it clear? Am I getting through? Am I okay?
Yeah.
Where are we going to find, if we will, a connection to any peoples with the modern day folk who say we want our land back? Isn't that the question? Okay. And will we find it? All right.
I don't really think they
So-
wanted the land back until it was cultivated and brought back to life, correct?
Correct. That's when Arabs started flooding into the land.
Yeah, like, hey, all these Jews that died from malaria and different diseases that spent time
They made a
farming
success.
and made it successful. What do you call it? Was the what were the villages called that they created? Shuttles or something?
No,
like that?
shtetls were in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah. But
the
the
kibbutz.
Tikva-
Kibbutz.
Oh, the
Yeah.
kibbutz.
They'd go and they'd farm the land and they made it
Right. They drain
viable
the
again.
swamps, farm the land.
Died
Yeah.
doing it, and now we want the land.
Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
again, let's develop it so that we know that for sure. What you're saying is for sure, but if a case can be made that there are a people that are truly connected that once owned the land, and that there can be a continuous line to the people today that say they own that same land, then we have to step back and say, well, what do we do?
But also a great deal of that land was sold to the Jews that were coming in.
Yeah.
So you have that whole issue too.
I mean,
Now
can
they want
we
it back.
Can we, as a military, I mean, this is tough, but can we say, as a militarily defeated people in Israel, thrown out by the Arabs, by the Muslims, we can say we own the land because God gave it to us, no question about it. But can we politically say we own the land? We can't.
Don't you think the important thing is to be able to make the case without a book that not everybody agrees on?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to
Just
do.
otherwise, it's just circular reasoning.
Yeah. But I think that we can do this.
Okay.
I think this is doable. Okay, so that's where we're going to go.
Because if Jews want to go back to the biblical land that God gave us title deed to, we got to take Manhattan and give it back to the Indians.
Mhm.
You know, and they
Would,
didn't
would we
build-
pay the same price, or would
I'll give them 24
24
hours for it. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. I hope this was helpful to you. Oh, we're bouncing here. We hope to see you Saturday morning at 9:30 for our Torah study, 10:30 here at Crossroads Church, and that's Saturday mornings at 9:30. I hope to see you, and shalom to you.